Fantastic.
I like that. Yeah. We're all friends here.
Okay, so we practiced this before, we've talked about it. You guys are ready? Reminder, affirmative speaks the negative, crossfire, affirmative, negative, crossfire, affirmative, negative, grand crossfire, and then the last two. Remember you have 2 minutes of timeouts. You can call that at any time. Well, not any time, anytime between speeches. And just let me know and I'll start that time for you guys. Are you ready? Okay, who's the first speaker? Oh, no. Okay. You got this. Ready? She's got it. And go.
The framework for today's debate is that in the justice system the death penalty is corrupt and unfair by deeming criminals as subhuman. In advocating for the abolition of the death penalty, a foundational argument centers on the inherent violation of fundamental human rights. The right to life, a cornerstone of our ethical and legal principles, is compromised by a system that allows for irreversible and potentially incorrect judgments. The risk of judicial error, underscored by instances of wrongful convictions, underscores the fidelity and capital punishment. Beyond the ethical dimension, the death penalty's proportionate deterrent effect is brought into question, with numerous studies challenging its efficacy compared to alternative forms of punishment. Additionally, concerns regarding the arbitrary and discriminatory application of the death penalty highlight systematic issues related to race, class, and geography. Emphasizing the physical burden and resource allocation associated with death penalty cases further strengthens the case for abolition. A global perspective, citing the international trend towards abolition and successful alternatives in various countries, reinforces the argument. By fostering a dialogue that incorporates moral, practical, and international consideration, advocates for abolition aim to promote a justice system that aligns with evolving standards of decency, human rights, and the broader principles of a just society. The death penalty should be abolished. Today, the protein will prove that abolishing the death penalty would positively affect the U.S. and international prison systems, as well as reflecting a broader shift in societal values towards promoting human dignity, compassion, and a commitment to justice that avoids the irreversible consequences of taking a human life. Systematic racism. The Death Penalty Information Center says racial bias against defendants of color and in favor of white victims has a strong effect on who is capitalized, prosecuted, sentenced to death, and executed, as well as in the modern era when executions have been carried out exclusively for murder. 75% of cases involve the murder of white victims, even though about half of all homicide victims in America are black. Largely, the racial discrimination comes from the selection of juries. This is because of a process known as death qualification, which dictates that to serve on a death penalty jury, a prosecutor juror must be willing to impose the death penalty. Those unwilling to impose the death penalty are excluded from jury service. Black people are more likely to oppose the death penalty, and as a result are disproportionately excluded from death penalty juries. The death penalty is largely political. In terms of the laws and political commentary surrounding the death penalty, it changes depending on the pressure of society and constituents. People of Congress and the president have different policies depending on what the current political climate is. Take, for example, President Bill Clinton. During the 90s, he having to gain votes through proving that he was tough on crime and thought that making the 1994 crime bill. This bill single-handedly changed the judicial system. The American Civil Liberties Union says that the platform encouraged the states to pass truth in sentencing laws, bragged about instituting the death penalty for nearly 60 more crimes, and even encouraged the prosecution of young people as adults. So the death penalty and concept reduces up for those possible sentences to less than human as they become a statistic for political ploys. An example during Clinton's campaign is a man named Ricky Ray Rector. In happenstance, the execution date for Ricky Ray Rector, a black man who had struggled with severe mental illness his entire life. fell before the New Hampshire primary after murdering a white police officer. Rector had shot himself in his left temple, and the surgery that followed amounted to an effective lobotomy. He was still sentenced to death penalty by an all-white jury. Rector was left, in the words of his lawyer, a zombie. He was unable to grasp what he did and what was happening around him. In prison, he was known for howling through the day and screaming into the night, for thinking that prison guards were releasing chickens and alligators into his cell. And Clinton refused to give him clemency. Instead, he flew home to preside over his execution. Human error. The death penalty, like many other systems, is prone to human error from juries, witnesses, confessions, and in all the system, humans are expected to act from the level of expected society, but it is difficult to hold everyone accountable. And there's ethical concerns. The death penalty raises moral and ethical questions.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for attending. We are on the negative side of the death penalty being abolished. My name is Avery, and I am the first speaker today. I am joined by Miles, Larry, and Emily. We are here to prove that the death penalty is necessary and that the death penalty should not be abolished. The weighing mechanism of this debate revolves around net benefit. So if this group proves that not abolishing the death penalty internationally is what's best for the largest number of people, we should win this debate. With that being said, we want to make it clear that we are looking at the death penalty on an international scale. We will back net benefits with retribution, the idea that the punishment should equal the crime. For example, someone who murders should get the death penalty that is already in place. You could look at this as a life for a life or a moral balance. To make it more clear, the death penalty can only be imposed on people convicted of capital offenses, such as murder, treason, genocide, or the killing or kidnapping of a congressman, the president, or a Supreme Court justice, U.S. Department of Justice. The death penalty is only considered in cases where a death occurs. This makes the death penalty a fair option. We would like to define 3 words. The first word we will define is death penalty, as death as a punishment for crime. The second word we will define is should, to express what is probable or expected. And the final word we will define is abolish, and we will define that as to completely do away with. All definitions from Merriam-Webster. Now that we have a clear understanding of all of our terms, our first contention is to make the death penalty rare, but leave the option open. We shouldn't leave the death penalty an option for crimes, we should leave the death penalty an option for crimes that are the worst of the worst. The death penalty isn't a punishment given out for just any crime, but the most vile. Chris Hicks, district attorney in Washoe County, said in an interview, the first 2 things to consider when thinking about the death penalty is just how sparingly and judicially prosecutors use it and the victims. Prosecutors have a death penalty review team, and decisions are based on the facts presented in the case. He mentioned that they have reviewed hundreds of homicide cases, and only 2 got the death penalty. This shows the death penalty is not just given out to everyone. With this contention, we will provide more reason to believe it. Our second contention is inherent risk. The inherent risk of housing these dangerous inmates includes risking the lives of other inmates, guards, and the general public when you factor the possibility of escape. South Dakota inmate Ronnie Burgett killed correctional officer R.J. Johnson during a failed prison escape. Johnson was beaten with a pipe and had his head covered in plastic wrap at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls, Associate Press News. This is just one of many examples of the risks inmates have on the people surrounding them. If death row inmates under maximum security can find ways to escape, our people are not safe. The only way to guarantee the safety of our prison guards, victims' families, and people in general is to keep the death penalty. Our final contention is the difficulty of application. With our group looking at this topic internationally, it further reassures us that it is irrational and impossible to abolish the death penalty. Because we are looking at this topic internationally, That would mean the death penalty would have to be abolished everywhere, which is impossible. In China, thousands they are the leader for the most confirmed executions. Next is Iran with 576, and then Saudi Arabia with 196 from the Death Penalty Information Center. Since we are looking at this internationally, abolishing the death penalty would be pretty much impossible, considering how often these places use it. There are also bigger issues at hand than the death penalty, such as wars, poverty, and poverty. These are more important to focus on, but the issue of the death penalty is complicated. But after considering all these factors, we believe keeping the death penalty in play is the best choice because abolishing it would not be wise.
Crossfire?
Can we get like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I'll just start a timer and let me know when you're done. Okay, go. We're at 31. Yeah. I know. 50.
Okay.
Okay, timeout is over.
Does that only count for them or all of us?
Only them, so you still have 2 minutes.
Oh, period.
And I'm going to start the timer for the crossfire now.
You guys said the system was corrupt and unfair. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So 75% of the cases that involve they involve the murder of a white victim, but half the homicide victims in America are black or people of color, and so automatically it's just like already kind of being racist towards them, and then also in the way that it takes people off of the jury that would be against the death penalty makes it unfair because it's already leaning towards wanting the death penalty, because it's not just like black people are taking off the people who are like like Catholics. They really value life, and so they would vote against the death penalty, so they're not allowed to be on the jury for death penalty cases.
So y'all would say that the system is unfair?
Yes. Okay, so you said that the death penalty is only applied whenever death occurs, but then you also mentioned that it can be applied for treason, but what about cases of treason where death doesn't occur? Because treason doesn't really imply the death of someone.
That was in a quote that was found, and that was sharing all the reasons why people need the death penalty.
But that went against your earlier statement that it was only applied for people who had killed another person or where death has occurred already. And then also you said that it was only used in a small scale.
I mean, treason can cause death.
But not in all cases.
But
So is it
I
only
mean, but all
applied?
cases are looked at. The death penalty it's 2 minutes.
It is now.
Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm keeping time.
Okay,
Enough.
I was like, I just want to.
Okay, who's my second speakers?
We're in order.
Yeah, we're in order.
Yes. We got you.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so much easier for me. Thank you. Okay. Now I just gotta get my stuff over there. Okay. Do you guys want time out or do you want to go?
I think I'm
Okay, and go.
okay. So in regards to inmates attempting to be held in jail, regardless if an inmate is sentenced to death or not, there is always a risk of violence from inmates to other inmates or to workers that comes from this system itself being a problem. And you mentioned how there are bigger problems in society than the death penalty, but that is not what we're discussing today, so I won't be addressing that. One thing is that you mentioned retribution, and there is not a statistical basis in which to judge this. So it is very hard for retribution to be a part of sentencing the death penalty in the manner that each crime is different, and so there is no scale or value in which you can apply this on an average. It's also important to mention that there is this idea that the death penalty has a deterrence factor, and which is why we should keep that, but it in fact really is not a deterrence factor, because in countries and states that have lost the death penalty, they have not experienced a corresponding increase in crime rates. There is no credible evidence that the death penalty increases crime rate, and actually the state with the highest number of murder rates is Louisiana, where they're still enacting the death penalty and currently have 76 people on death row. Also, the people that are on death row have no issue taking human life and don't value it the way that people in society typically do. For example, Richard Ramirez, who was a serial killer and rapist, he was on trial for 19 death sentences, and while in the courtroom, he mocked the jury and said he wanted to die so that he'd be with Satan. So in this case, the death penalty would be sentencing him to freedom in his own way. It would have been punished in his mind. If you're going along this case of retribution, that is not retributive in any way, shape, or form. He wants this. How is that fitting the crime and helping these families feel like their family member or friend or whoever has been justly avenged? Additionally, you mentioned, again, the violence in prison, and the issues surrounding the possibility of murders reoffending in prison is largely a judicial system in prison issue and not related to the death penalty. For that matter, those convicted of violent crime are not typically reoffenders. It is said that there was a study that was done, I believe, by a university, and they tracked the arrests of more than 400,000 people exiting prison in 2005 across 30 states. They found 20% of individuals released arrested for different offense. And in terms of retribution, a lot of that comes with the closure of the victims' families, and not all families believe that for their family, for the victim to have been avenged or for them to have closure, that they must have somebody else killed via death penalty. In addition, it really just elongates the process of grief they have to go through because of the process of lengthy appeals and a lot of uncertainty that comes with it. It prolongs the grieving process, and life imprisonment without parole is seen as an alternative that provides closure without the moral and practical complications associated with execution, because these people are experiencing much grief with the people they've lost, and they should not have to have this moral conundrum following the grief that they already have. And public opinion recently, for I think the first time in history, shows that majority of people find that they oppose, at least in the U.S., find that they oppose the death penalty, and that is all I have. Thank you.
Go.
First things first, I want to say thanks again to the judge and to the audience and to the other team. Without you guys, we wouldn't have a debate today. But I'm going to get right into things. First things first, I want to talk about the framework, corrupt and unfair. I agree that it's corrupt and unfair, and so do you guys. Things are corrupt and unfair. But what you guys agreed to in my opponent's cross-examination was that the system is corrupt and unfair. I agree the system is corrupt and unfair, but the death penalty isn't. It's a systemic issue. The system is the issue, not the death penalty. And we agree the system should change, but we should not get rid of the death penalty because of a corrupt system. And that's why we have our first contention 1. Make the death penalty rare, but leave the option open. Because we know that this is a systemic issue, not a death penalty issue, like you guys agreed to. And since you agreed to it, we have to look at it through that lens of how can we fix the system, not how can we fix the death penalty. This is a system. So if we fix the death penalty, and less people get the death penalty, then the death penalty isn't the problem, the system is the problem. I also want to talk about our definitions. This is something that the opposing team did not provide at all. They have provided no definitions. And they said that our third contention of, I'm just going to be hopping around the map here, difficulty of application, they talked about how other world issues aren't a problem. These are a major issue because if we're looking at this, if we're looking at the definition of should to express what is probable or expected, well, we're looking at this through a global lens. So how is it probable or expected to globally abolish the death penalty when countries like China don't even let us know their full numbers? All we get is 1,000 people have died, which we have cited that they have killed more than 1,000 people. Then you have Iran. And you have these countries that don't even let the West in. So how do we expect them to abolish the death penalty? We can't. It's not expected or probable. And if we're going with that definition of should from Merriam-Webster, then there is no way that we can bring that we can abolish the death penalty worldwide, which is what we're looking at worldwide lens, because the opponents even used a global perspective in their first statement. And then the next problem is my opponents brought in no weighing mechanism, no way to weigh this case today. We have the weighing mechanism of net benefits, the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. This is very important because that means that we have to go with our weighing mechanism of net benefits. And if we're going with our weighing mechanism of net benefits, we can see that there's inherent risk to prison guards. Yes, there's always inherent risk to prison guards, but like my opponent just quoted, the Ramirez case, and they said that people on death row have no value for human life. That was their exact quote. If they have no value for human life, then why are we going to put them at risk with guards and other prisoners? That seems senseless and actually causes more human life to be taken, like we've shown, where there was an attack on prison guards, and we have the ability for these people to escape. That's why the death penalty is needed, because the inherent risk of keeping these prisoners alive in prisons where they can inflict more damage to more people. My opponent also brought up not all families. Not all families want the death penalty. Well, my opponent actually said that there's no statistics or scales to show retribution. So my question is, why don't you have statistics to show that all families want the death penalty? There is no statistics in that statement. That is just an opinion-based statement. And so since that's an opinion-based statement, and we're doing everything based off a scale of statistics, then that can't be allowed either. Unless we want to look at statistics, and then I'd be open to that. But if we're going off a scale of statistics, that has no statistics, so it shouldn't have no weight. So I'm going to go back to our first contention, make the death penalty rare, but leave it open. This was not touched by my opponents. They have not talked about how the death penalty should be, the system could be better, but the death penalty should be left open, and so that was a dropped argument. And the second contention on inherent risk. My opponent said that, yes, there is inherent risk, but there's always inherent risk, so we shouldn't try to stop that. That was basically the argument made. So that wasn't really touched either. That was just basically agreed to. And then the third contention, difficulty of application, they just dropped that completely. They said it's not a problem, that we try to abolish this worldwide. They said since there's other issues going on, well, if we try to abolish something worldwide, that's taking precedence over other issues because we're making such a stand. And so if we're taking precedence in the news, in the Senate, in like the world space, we're taking problems away from very big issues like the Ukraine war, the Hamas-Israel crisis. And so since we're taking problems away from those kind of things, yes, we are actually it's an issue worldwide. And since that is the case and that hasn't been touched, that was another dropped argument by my opponents. And they have not been questioned. I talked about my opponent's arguments, which were racism and an unfair system. But yes, the system is unfair, but the death penalty isn't. We agree that the system should be fixed, but the death penalty needs to be kept. Because it's not a death penalty issue, it's a system issue. That's my time.
Okay. Crossfire. Do you get, anyone want timeouts, or you good? You're good?
You're good.
Okay, and go.
Okay, so you guys are looking at it through a global perspective like you quoted, right?
When did we say that we were?
You said in the beginning, you said, we're looking at this through a global perspective is the word you used. Your
We
first
spo-
speaker.
I don't remember
Okay.
that. We specifically in our introduction stated
Yeah,
how
we
it would
did.
positively affect the U.S.
No, you said global perspective though.
Did we say global perspective?
Yes.
Yes, you did, okay. So,
Um,
we're looking at this through a global perspective then, and so then we have to abolish it worldwide, wouldn't that just make sense? And since we're looking at it through a global perspective?
We never stated.
Logically.
We never said that we wanted to abolish it worldwide. We said we wanted to address it globally.
But abolish it is the question, right?
We were addressing the question of it, but
The
we're not
question is abolish,
stating-
the question is abolish,
I have a
right?
question for you, please. Not everyone believes in net benefit, so how is that a scale that can be generally applied to
Not everyone believes in net benefits, well, it's the only weighing mechanism provided in this round. You guys provided no weighing mechanism, so we have to go with mine, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right.
This debate is centering on the death penalty, so why are you bringing up unrelated topics?
Unrelated topics, no, these aren't unrelated topics, like I said, these are very important topics. Because
They are
if we-
important topics
If we try to
societally.
abolish the death penalty worldwide, then it's gonna take take attention away from these problems. And these problems, people are dying in mass numbers. What do you think is more important, abolishing the death penalty worldwide, or trying to, which is very impossible because of these countries like China or Iran, or trying to stop death and providing attention to the Ukraine war, or the Hamas and Israel crisis? Which is more important? I think stopping death in Ukraine and stopping death in Israel and Hamas would be a bigger issue than trying to limit the death penalty in countries that we can't even get into.
What does that have to do with the death penalty?
I
today?
told you what it has to do. It has to do because we're taking attention away from these issues by trying to get rid of the death penalty internationally. There's
We're not
only so
talking
much I can do.
internationally. I'm talking
You-
in the U.S.
You
so
said
topics-
internationally, you just agreed to that.
And that's 2 minutes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Third speaker.
Can you take your time out?
Yeah. And I'm gonna start it now. You're at 50 seconds. Just
Okay, let's just.
We're
No,
Stop
good,
it.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, and go.
Awesome. To reiterate what my colleagues have said, based off of global trends and perspectives, we are talking more on following the global trends of the countries that are abolishing the death penalty. And going off of that, we have systemic racism. The death penalty is marred by systemic racism, evident in racial bias during convictions of the inclusion of black jurors. And we have politicization of the death penalty, and political motivations often drive the death penalty, as in instances like President Clinton's tough on crime stance. Human error. Within the death penalty system, they are forced confessions from flawed juries. Introduces the risk of wrongful convictions. And the Marissa Lucio case exemplifies how systemic flaws compounded by human error can lead to unjust outcomes. And they have ethical concerns. The death penalty raises profound questions challenging the moral foundation of state-sanctioned killings. And the conflicting perspectives on the justice and the devaluation of human life underscore the ethical dilemmas inherent in capital punishment. The impact on families and society, we have the death penalty inflicts prolonged suffering on families, prolonging pain through legal proceedings, and the University of Akron's findings emphasize the emotional toll on victims' families, questioning the societal impact and perpetuations of trauma. And then international trends. A global trend away from the death penalty reflects an evolving understanding of human rights. Abolishing the death penalty aligns with international shifts toward a more humane approach to justice, not specifically talking on China or Iran. Lack of deterrence. We have capital punishment lacks empirical evidence as a crime deterrent. Examples from the state like Louisiana with high murder rates despite the death penalty challenge the notion of its effectiveness in preventing crime. High costs. On the contrary to assumptions, the death penalty is financially burdensome with lengthy legal processes and appeals contributing to higher costs than life imprisonment. This fiscal concern questions the efficiency and responsibility of maintaining the death penalty. Now we also have prison murder. The issues surrounding, excuse me. Oh, also you had mentioned an attack on prison guards is a case of reforming the jail systems, not the death penalty worldwide. And the U.S. has no control over, not necessarily no control, but we have very little control over what other countries do within their judicial system. We can only lead by example. The death penalty, like many other systems, is prone and vulnerable to human error, from juries to witnesses to confessions. Like I stated before, it's a system of humanes who are expected to act at the level expected of society, but it's difficult to hold everyone accountable. Take forced confessions and false confessions due to intimidation. In the case of Marissa Lucio that I mentioned, a large damning part of her conviction came from a false confession. In the article of CNN, they state, Lucio, now 53, was convicted in large part of her attorneys argue on the basis of coerced confession. She gave authorities an aggressive late-night interrogation the same night her daughter died. Lucio was particularly susceptible to coercion by authorities because of her history as a lifelong survivor of sexual abuse and domestic violence. They say, citing medical experts who reviewed her case, this is an example of how not only is the justice system corrupt within every part of the process, but this is heavily subject to human error. The jurors of the case have no clue this information unless presented, if it is even known, and so the jury will convict on a false confession, which is another part of the problem of human error. Juries are humans who must decide the fates of the people on trial, and they are equally susceptible to the whims of the court system and might make judgments that they later do not agree with. And this ties into the ethical concerns. The debate penalty raises moral and ethical questions, including the principle that taking a life as a punishment is fundamentally wrong and inhumane. Many argue that society should not endorse or participate in state-sanctioned killings, as it goes against the value of a civilized and compassionate society. On the opposing side of it, it's also argued that